Hello everyone, thank you for joining us on The Focus Weekly. Today we are focusing on the budget presented by Professor Chitambara, a 58.2 trillion national budget, a staggering 14-fold increase from the 2023 budget. What does it all mean and how does it affect you? We'll be discussing that and a whole lot more on The Focus Weekly. Welcome to the show. It is The Focus Weekly. I'm speaking to Dr. Professor Chitambara, bringing you back for a post-budget discussion now. Before the budget was presented, we had quite an enlightening discussion where you predicted or forecast or thought that Professor Chitambara would come up with a pro-poor budget. What are your comments on what was then presented following our discussion?
Well, I think it's the Prof has been very audacious in presenting this budget. Because there's been mixed reactions. I've been meeting with key stakeholders, the business sector, even civil society organizations, activists, the trade unionists. I think they are obviously the good things. Again, it depends on where you're actually sitting or standing. But there are some maybe in quotes good, some not so good proposals. But what I like about it is that these are still proposals. I think they're still amenable to changes if we're actually able to build a critical mass of people that can advocate for the necessary changes. In terms of the structure, or in terms of proposed spending, there hasn't been major changes. When you look at health, for example, it got about 10.8% of the total budget, which is slightly down from 11.2% this year. Education, again, is almost the same. We are still below the benchmarks, which, again, is a major concern. I would have thought that with the raft of tax proposals that is announced, there's probably going to increase spending on these key sectors. But again, the overall size of the budget is a massive 58.2 trillion, which is an increase of almost about 1,300% from the initial 2023 budget. Of course, that obviously definitely is going to have some inflationary implications because any injection of that amount of money into the economy, it definitely triggers the exchange rate depreciation and inflationary pressures. And also, given the fact that Zimbabwe inflation has actually been quite high, when you consider, say, for example, the monthly changes in the poverty datum line, which is actually in Zim dollars, the poverty datum line per 1 person, it has actually increased. It has been increased on a monthly basis by around 10%. Which is a proxy or an indicator in terms of how we are doing in terms with respect to Zim dollar pricing. Then on an annual basis, it has been increasing by around 300%. So again, that points to the fact that Zim dollar inflation is very high. So it could actually mean that maybe by the second half of next year, we may need a supplementary budget. This year, the minister didn't actually present. But there's going to be, you have to seek condonation or forgiveness from Parliament because we exceeded the 4.2 trillion.
Yeah, Dr. Chitambara, you talk about that having obvious inflationary implications, but the finance minister projecting or forecasting that inflation will be below 20% in 2024.
Yeah, if you're looking at blended inflation, definitely it could be, given the fact that we've now migrated from arithmetic estimation of our inflation to a geometric estimation method, which is the effect of lowering the blended inflation rate. But in terms of Zim dollar inflation, definitely we will not be within those. Of course, we are no longer publishing official statistics, but Zim dollar pricing will increase definitely by more than 20%.
Given, though, that the bulk of transactions, depending on who you speak to, 90%, 85% are in US dollars, the effect perhaps will
be moderated, yeah. But of course, but we know the budget has been presented in Zim dollars, which could actually then cause some destabilizing effect on the whole macro economy. But like the minister is in it's a catch-22 situation. There are a lot of pressures, especially around the debt. Our debt stock has actually been increasing, and the more we fail to service our arrears, the more the debt actually increases. So we've seen the external debt has actually increased. And the challenge, my concern there is that we continue to borrow money externally at market interest rates plus premium, which is very unsustainable. Then domestic borrowings has also been rising. And my concern, obviously, is that it crowds out the private sector. Yeah, so government is doing all the borrowing, so the private sector can't borrow for working for
productive. Well, I suppose the private sector will say we can't borrow at such expensive rates.
They also, and that's also another,
But let's now talk about some of the specifics. Obviously, to finance this budget, the minister has introduced a raft of taxes.
Yes.
At a time when you thought there would be tax relief.
Yes.
But we've seen new taxes. Let's talk quickly about some of them, particularly some of the contentious ones. Number one is the wealth tax.
Yeah, I think that one is a very contentious one. It's difficult to administer. I know a number of some countries have introduced a specific wealth tax. In a number of states in the US, they also have the wealth tax. But I think it's, I don't think it's really a wealth tax, given that whether you have one house, two houses, or three houses, of course, if you have more houses, you are going to pay more. But I would have thought that for those that have just one property, they must actually be exempt from paying that, because if it's a wealth tax, then you must be targeting people probably with multiple properties, or even targeting businesses.
Maybe the terminology is not correct, but I suspect what the minister is trying to do here is recognizing that because of the informalization of the economy, maybe let's go, the only way to make sure that everyone is paying or contributing is to go to the
But that's problematic, because even in spite of the informalization of the economy, even those in the informal, they still pay tax through VAT. Even the micro, small and medium enterprises, they're paying VAT, because before a manufacturer delivers to your shop, actually the VAT is already within the price that you pay to the manufacturer. But of course, it's good to allow them to register for VAT. That's also one way of probably regularizing the informal economy. But again, the threshold of 25,000, I'm sure a number of micro enterprises don't. So we may need to probably revise review that downwards, maybe to around 10,000 or even 15,000. So at least to a lot of the micro enterprises, because most of the businesses are really micro enterprises, probably a one-man business, or even two people, So they may not have that turnover. So they could even be driven now further into the underground economy.
We'll come back and talk about that certainly, and a lot more from the budget. It is the Focus Weekly. My name is Farai Mwakutuya. My guest, Dr. Professor Chitambara, will be coming back with me to discuss the budget shortly. Welcome back. The Focus Weekly continues. Dr. Chitambara, before we went to the break, we're now talking about some of those informal traders and this requirement that they must be VAT registered. I suppose some people have said, look, this is an effort to try and cushion some of the big retailers because there's been an outcry about these tuck shops. But I've also heard certain people saying, look, who needs who? Is it the manufacturers that need the tuck shops, or the tuck shops need the manufacturers? Because historically, these tuck shops have traded in imported goods. So it's the manufacturers who went there.
Definitely.
So this measure, who does it serve?
Well, they're trying to... There's into a fine balance, really, protecting the interests of the different stakeholders, whether they're formal retailers. Of course, the manufacturers, I would assume they probably need these guys more because they're getting hard currency. So, although some have argued that the distribution cost may be higher for these guys in the informal economy. But I think there's need ultimately to come up with some a fine balance, which takes into account rather the interests of the different stakeholders within that particular value chain.
Let me ask you this, because I know it is a term that you often use when I speak to you, the structural issues. So if you address this issue and say, look, small retailers or, be VAT registered and all these sort of measures, the reason why these guys are more competitive than the bigger retailers is because of structural issues, exchange rate issues. If you don't address those, really you're not fixing the problem.
Exactly. Ultimately, I think that's what needs to be done. Remove the distortions, the structural bottlenecks, so at least every business actually can operate viably. So ultimately it's all about, identifying what are the key structural bottlenecks and try to address those.
As a business person I spoke to the other day said, we're discussing post-budget. He said, look, the expectation that, you must be VAT registered. Some of these businesses are not set up to wind up. So just because they're not VAT registered doesn't mean they will close shop.
Of course. Yeah. I'm sure most of them would go underground. But like we said, they traditionally relied on imports from either South Africa, largely from South Africa. Yeah. So we could see probably a lot of them actually going underground. Was one reason why a lot of our businesses are informal is because the cost of compliance is on the high side. So what the good prof has actually done is to even increase the cost of compliance.
Corporate income tax. I think at the time we spoke last week, you had thought it would come down. It's actually
yes. Yeah. They've gone back to pre-COVID levels, so definitely it's going to affect the cost of doing business and the cost of pricing. Pricing will be affected as well. And of course, a number of businesses were also lamenting that. Of course, 1% may not sound too significant, but I think it does have an impact.
Especially now combined with, I suppose, all the others. It may not be a direct tax, but when you increase tollgate fees and distribution, transport costs, it builds into.
And ultimately there's a loss of competitiveness in the economy.
All right. One tax that I think some people have certainly applauded as very progressive is the sugar tax.
Yes. In fact, I'm one of the people that have advocated for that. But I think the rate is a bit exorbitant, because I was doing the numbers. Say for a 500 milliliter PET bottle of Coke, I think the tax will be around $1, not less than $1. So obviously that's going to increase very substantially the price of these beverages. I would probably prefer maybe a downward revision of that, maybe by 50%. Yeah, but I think it's very critical. It's in line with good practice. Regionally, South Africa has done that. In the most Asian countries, they've actually come up with those sugar taxes on sugar beverages. But it's also important to make sure that the funds that are mobilized go to the intended purpose.
The ring fence.
Yes, the ring fencing is very important there. In the past, we've seen, we also had the airtime tax that was introduced. And the minister told us that he was going to ring fence that fund towards the health sector. We haven't yet much about that now.
I suppose it speaks to the question I was going to ask: how do you actually then audit and monitor that? Because all these funds are going to consolidated into one fund, and that's what's paid salaries and paid for these other things. Is there a way what's the best way to say, okay, so far via sugary tax in drinks, we've mobilized $1 million, and there's the 1 million, or that's what it's bought?
Well, I think the AIDS levy has been a huge success. Of course, they've created the National AIDS Council. I think it's been fairly effective. I know a number of people may not agree with my sentiments, but that could be one way, or even create a board that is with representation from different stakeholders to probably manage that fund. I think that also in terms of transparency and accountability, that could, I think, go a long way in terms of enhancing the overall confidence of Zimbabweans in public finance management in general. So because ultimately it's about accountability and transparency. And the more you involve other people, other stakeholders,
the greater the transparency.
Yes.
Some people have asked, why stop at fizzy soft drinks? Why not extend? There are so many other products that have high sugar content. Why not extend it to them as well?
I think eventually probably that's where we could be heading. Yeah. Although in most countries they've just targeted the beverages. The sugar tax normally is just levied on beverages. Yeah. So, but I think eventually the prof hard pressed for cash will also look into that.
All right. We need to take another short break, Doc. We'll come back. This is the Focus Weekly, and we'll continue this discussion very shortly. Welcome back. We continue the discussion. Dr. Chitambara, One of the other progressive measures that I think many people have applauded is the pronouncement with regards to lithium beneficiation. Some people saying, look, it's a welcome, it's the right way to go. What's your take on those?
I think it's a welcome development. Countries that are doing well actually are going that route of adding value, processing their minerals, and I think I support that. That's one way of locking in value, one way of encouraging industrialization, based, of course, on our competitive advantages in terms of mineral endowment. So moving up the value chain, I think that's the way to go. Of course, not just for lithium. I must be doing it for all our commodities, because we're in a commodity-driven economy, and we are vulnerable to the vagaries of the global markets and volatilities therein. By adding value, you actually supporting the industrialization-driven sustainable development process of the economy.
We've sort of been down this road in the past previously with platinum miners, where I remember they were given deadlines, you must have done this by that, or present your plans and proposals. But the refinery that we, I suppose, wanted never happened.
I think it's a process. I think eventually we'll get there. I think ultimately we need to, it's also about incentivizing the process of going that route. We're also mindful of the fact that these guys have gone through a lot in terms of some of these challenges within the economy. So that obviously also sets back that noble initiative or process. But I believe eventually, if we address some of the structural challenges, I think we'll get there.
Okay. You've spoken about being a commodity-based economy, the vagaries of the global markets, and indeed we are feeling that because
these prices are softening. Yes.
And that means that our resource, or the resources, the funds that are available to Professor Mthuli are limited, which is perhaps why he's gone this route. Is there anything that you would do differently if you were in his shoes?
Yeah, definitely. I'm a proponent, obviously, of lower taxes, lesser taxes, but I believe that once you do that, you are actually enhancing industry and individuals' productive capacity to be able to generate more wealth. And that then becomes a tonic for other indirect taxes like VAT. So if I were the Minister of Finance, definitely I would relook the whole tax regime. I always love the model, the Irish model. They came up with a uniform, simplified and low tax regime. And they were actually able to encourage local investments, attract more foreign direct investment inflows, and ultimately boost revenue inflows and boost economic growth. One time the Irish economy was growing by around 25% per annum. And even up to now, they're one of the top performing economies in Europe. So it's really on the basis of that those tax incentives. And also in terms of even the wealth tax, I would scrape that away and probably come up with increased value-added tax on selected products. Was 30% of the total tax revenues are coming from VAT. So I think we can actually, by increasing VAT beyond 15% on certain products, even on sugar beverages, we actually mobilize more resources in which government can then use to finance other productive sectors of the economy, in the social sectors, even water and sanitation. I think it's an area that we also talked about in the pre-budget discussion. And the allocation, in my view, it's not sufficient given the extent of the problem. So I think we would have expected more public investments and allocation and investments in the wash sector. Of course, there's been an improvement, but maybe not good enough.
So you talk about public, corporate, business, and investor confidence. When you have measures or plans, as we understand it, where the Revenue Authority will be empowered to go into, cash boxes in people's accounts, what does that do in terms of inspiring confidence?
It actually erodes confidence, and that proposal in itself actually erodes confidence. That should not happen, actually, unless you have a court order authorizing you to do that. But in a normal economy, it's something that must not happen. I think as a country, we've had challenges, especially around the issue of property rights in general. And that's a key underpinning for sustained growth and development in an economy. I think when the reverence for property rights, the rule of law, I think that's very critical. Of course, I know government is trying to institute reforms to assuage the fears from investors, but I think we can do more. And someone was telling me that there actually has been a massive depreciation in the past few days of the local currency. In fact, today, I think, on Friday. So it could be an indication that maybe the market has not received the budget in a very positive light.
But as you quite rightly say, it said earlier at the beginning of the show that these are proposals. So it is a budget that is presented. It's a proposal made by the finance minister. Still needs to be passed by Parliament. Consultations as are happening now. So maybe some of these things will be revised.
Definitely, I'm sure a lot of the things will be revised. I'm sure. We are meeting with the minister also on Thursday. It's also an opportunity to profile some of what we've been saying in this interview.
Indeed. And I think what's also important is that citizens can have their say through their members of parliament, through their representation, which is a platform that I suppose many people don't take advantage of. Indeed. Prof, one final question, obviously, as we head towards wrapping up. You said at the beginning, audacious budget. It's, more than 1,000% higher than what, with the initial. Do you think that this will actually be met very quickly?
No, I don't think it will be met. I think we'll need a supplementary budget, definitely, because that's already telling you that an injection of 58 trillion into an economy the size of Zimbabwe definitely will trigger inflation. There's no doubt about that. Any injection of liquidity, whether budgeted or not budgeted, will trigger inflation, because whether it's a bonus that you're receiving, once you get your bonus, you have to convert that into USD to preserve your value. So that conversion process creates excess demand for the USD, which causes the local currency to depreciate. So definitely, there's no doubt about that. Yeah, there's going to be inflationary pressures.
Well, we'll look forward to speaking to experts such as yourself throughout the course of this year to analyze where we are. Very important points, some of which you've raised from previous budgets, and just follow through in terms of what has actually happened to them. But I want to thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing your insights. Very, very valuable.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that does it for this edition of the Focus Weekly. I've been speaking to Dr. Professor Chitambara, analyzing and breaking down the budget presented by Professor Chitambara. I think many people out there have had a lot to say about it, and so we're speaking to one of the experts to give us his opinion and his views. I'm sure this discussion will continue, and if you would like to, please do so. Engage us on the digital platforms and social media platforms that are appearing on your screen right now. We encourage you to follow us and subscribe us. My name is Farai Makutuya. Sure, join me again next time for another edition of the show. Bye-bye.